and apply the actuarial skill set and pricing skill set to different lines of business, which is what's kept me around because I've found that interesting. I also did a rotation over into our research unit and kind of in the early stages of when predictive modeling was really getting going at Allstate, was in it then, which was quite a while ago. But ultimately, I found my way to the catastrophe modeling team, which I am on now in a pretty untraditional role. I will say, if you look at my career path at Allstate, I'm typically the one, I always used to say, if there's a spot where they can't figure out where to put someone, I ended up there because I'm always looking for a challenge. So I kind of have the most untraditional path for an Allstate actuary. But I ended up in a spot where in my day-to-day, it's not a necessarily strictly actuarial profession of what I'm doing right now. Like you could do my job without, having taken actuarial exams. There's a lot of benefit to having taken actuarial exams because I'm able to apply the knowledge of pricing for the folks who are using the CAT models for pricing purposes, and then also for risk management and enterprise risk management as well. So that's what I've been doing for a while now, getting to know the CAT models much, much more. And I am in the Chicagoland area as well. That's where I'm with most of the Allstate folks.
And I'm Ken Fikes. I work with the Infinite Actuary. I have initially jumped around a lot. I started in 1995 for a large insurance company, started in pricing, started out with a mainframe terminal green screen programming in Pascal indication models. So that's where I started for workers' compensation. From there, I kind of moved around quite a bit within that company, settling in more of a management role where I worked with regional vice presidents, kind of, I guess it would be early enterprise risk management kind of within those areas. I found that it's good to have the skills of an actuary to understand models or understand the numbers and be able to explain it to people that aren't in the actuarial field or don't necessarily understand numbers all that well. And it works out well to know all the areas within an insurance company. I went to a large consulting firm after that. And so a little bit different work, a little bit more work, I should say, a little bit more travel, more exposure to a lot of things. Ended up with a small insurance company, and then in 2006 ended with the Infinite Actuary. I've been here for almost 15 years now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Talon, do you want to cue the next slide for Allison's presentation? Okay, perfect. Right. Allison, go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. I think I've probably met a few of you before. I'm Allison Newhouse, and as they mentioned, I'm the university liaison between the CAS and Purdue. Obviously, I work with Kathy and Sandy, and I'm on the advisory council with TJ, and I've also taken one of Ken's exam seminars. So cool to see all of those connections there. So I'm really excited about the panelists that we've put together for today. I think you guys will get to see into the CAS. You've heard none of them have had the same job, and even for a short period of time. So no matter how long your career is, there's usually lots of variety in your work, which I think will be cool to showcase tonight. So before we get started, I just want to give a brief overview of the CAS, answer maybe some of the easier questions, low-hanging fruit, so that then the panelists can focus more on their career paths and some of the other questions that you have. So you want to go to the first slide. Most of you probably know there's two main societies for actuaries, the SOA and the CAS. The difference is solely based on what line of insurance you're working on. So most of the CAS is based on property and casualty. So auto, property, workers' compensation are kind of the three big hitters, but there's lots of other smaller lines of insurance within that. We're a little bit newer than the SOA. Celebrated the 100th anniversary about, well, I guess 7 years now, so a while ago. and quite a bit smaller than the SOA. You can see the membership there, we're around 9,000 members, which is credentialed actuaries. So if you want to go to the next slide, I think the biggest question probably for all of us when we were in school and all of you is, how do you choose? Which one do you go to, the SOA or the CAS? And I will say I've only worked in the CAS, so I probably can't give a complete answer. It sounds like most of the panelists have also only worked in the CAS. However, I can tell you what kind of drew me to the CAS and what's proven true to keep me there. And at the heart of it is the dynamic work. So the lines of insurance in the CAS are typically shorter policy periods than the SOA. So instead of looking things, over the course of a lifetime or a term policy, you're looking at like 6 months to a year when you're pricing. So that gives you the chance to react pretty quickly to lots of things that are changing in the environment, whether that be legal things, environmental things, or just social trends. So a couple big hitters here. Usage-based insurance and telematics has been something that's been very prevalent over the last several years. Things like pay per mile driving, or pay per mile auto insurance, you guys have probably heard about for people who don't drive very much, who live in the cities. So that's something, up and coming that's very dynamic that we've gotten to work on. Even things like COVID-19 and what happened in the year 2020, how has that changed driving patterns? Are there fewer people on the roads, but does that mean people drive faster? So there's always something changing. There's always more data to look at. So really just a really large variety within the CAS. And so that's what drew me there. And I think probably a lot of people would answer similarly. The next slide, I think, talks about, if I have my slides memorized. Yeah, so there's a few main categories of work within the CAS. This is 4 of the big ones. There's more that are not included on this slide, but we've already mentioned a few of these in the introductions. So pricing or rate making is setting the prices for the insurance policy. So determining, which segments of business should be charged more or less, and working with the Department of Insurance to get those rates approved. Reserving is making sure that your company is holding on to enough money to pay claims. And so you have to estimate the claims that you expect to see in the future and determine how much money your company should be holding. Reinsurance, I know, is in the SOA as well as the CAS, but that's like insurance for insurance companies. So lots of times working with catastrophes or higher severity lines of business with lower frequency. And then enterprise risk management. So being able to take a more holistic view to risk at your entire company, and lots of integration, as it says here, with governance and strategy and decision making. So those are 4 of the key areas. But this next slide kind of just has a few names of roles that you could have as an actuary. And the CAS put this together. I think it's a great slide just to show the variety within the CAS actuarial profession. Definitely this is not all encompassing, and if one box is in one place in the scale, doesn't mean that's true for every single person that fits within that box. But it is a good visual to see just the variety within the profession. Ken mentioned that when he was consulting, there's a lot more travel. I work in insurance. I haven't had to travel very much. There's a lot of data intensive work. I would argue probably most of these are data intensive. But then also lots of opportunities to work with other people. So I really do think that if you like the core subject of actuarial science, there's probably something for you within the CAS. And, if you like all 4 of the things that are on this scale, there's probably something for you as well. So also with the CAS, there's only one exam track, which we'll talk about it in a little bit. But once you're an FCAS, you're an FCAS. And so that doesn't mean that you're only a pricing FCAS or you're only a reserving FCAS. You can move around. There's lots of different opportunities for you throughout your career. So getting into a little bit of what the CAS looks like, I mentioned that there's about 9,000 members. So those are people who are either associates or fellows. And it's been growing over the last several years. 2020 a little bit slower, but that's because of some hiccups with exams in 2020 in the virtual environment. So I imagine that 2% will be a little bit higher in 2021 now that exams are all back on track. I think the next slide shows our global diversity. So definitely we are concentrated in North America, the United States, and Canada. However, it is a global organization, and there are continuous efforts to expand even more globally. So you can see quite a few countries represented in the CAS, and I would imagine that this will spread out even more in the future. And then another slide just to kind of show another view of the different types of employment. So lots of these we talked about before, but about half of the CAS credentialed actuaries work at insurance companies. And then the other half are mixed. Lots of consultants and reinsurance, but you can see there's also some other categories there as well. And then lastly, on the statistics side of the makeup of the CAS, you can see kind of the main companies where CAS actuaries are employed. So this again is credentialed actuaries. Hopefully a lot of these companies are familiar to you, lots of insurance companies as you can see, and I believe a lot of these recruit at Purdue, so you have some good exposure to them. So salary is obviously something that always comes up when people are asking about career prospects. Lots of studies have shown that the FCAS designation does have a higher salary than some other actuarial designations. This is a study from Ezra Penland, so you can check that out online. But I think more importantly, this shows just how much room for growth there is in your salary. You know, with the exam, that helps you out a lot in the first few years of your career as you're passing exams. But then even after that, there's lots of different opportunities for actuaries, and you know, definitely if that's the right job for you, there's opportunities to make a pretty high salary. All right, so maybe the most important is the exam track and how do you get to your credential. Obviously the track is a little bit different and the experience is a little bit different for everybody. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, it's spread out a little bit from the SOA. So I know you guys have a little bit more pressure to make your decision a little earlier than some of us had to make our decision. But to get to your associates, there's a few main components. So your VEEs, which I believe the course of study at Purdue, if you're doing the actuarial science major, will cover both of those topics. Then there's also 2 online courses. Most people take these once they start working. They're less intensive than a college class, in my opinion. You know, you have some time to take that, and then it's like a maybe 1 or 2 hour exam that you take on a computer. So not that they're easy by any means, but they're not as intense as exams. Then we have a course on professionalism, which is a 1.5 or 2 day seminar where you learn about the actuarial, like the standards of practice and different, the code of conduct of actuaries. And then of course the exams, which is what everybody knows the most about. So the next slide details the exams to get your ACAS. On the left are the 3 shared exams. So they just have different names, but they're the same thing. So PFM and IFM all will count for the CAS. But then there's all these exams on the right side that you'll also have to take, which are only from the CAS and not the SOA. So MAS 1 and 2 are 2 of our newer exams. And then exam 5 gives you the basic techniques for rate making and reserving. And then exam 6 is all about regulation. And that will vary based on the country that you're practicing in. So once you pass all those exams and do the course on professionalism and the online courses and the VEs, you can get your ACAS. So that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. But after you get your ACAS, there's, I say just, but it's a lot, 3 more fellowship exams, and then you become a fellow. So the fellowship exams are kind of an advanced reserving exam that also includes enterprise risk management, an advanced rate making exam, and then financial risk and rate of return. So in all, I think there's still technically 10 exams. Here's a little graphic that the CAS has put together of of your route to get there. But like I said, this route can look different for everybody. You don't necessarily have to take the exams in order. Definitely, I think it benefits everyone to take, 1, 2, and 3F or PFM and IFM first, since those are the 3 that are the same between the 2 societies. And then once you've had a chance to have an internship and kind of dip your toe in the water in one of the societies, you might know more which way you want to go. I honestly don't know like how our count compares to the current tracks on the SOA, but I think in general they're fairly similar, different numbers for different tracks, but it is a pretty large time commitment, as you guys have probably all learned by now. But in the end, I think it's worth it, and I think it's a good, alternative to graduate school for us. Like, we just have bachelor's degrees for the most part, and then you get to further your education while you're still working and making money and getting experience. So lastly, this slide has a call out to Student Central. I highly encourage you all to join it. Even if you're only slightly interested in the CAS, it's free with your purdue.edu email address. And there's lots of different things that go on there, different blog posts, different webinar opportunities for students. There's different student programs that are free to attend. Sometimes they'll have postings about internships. So really a good community to kind of get plugged into, and it's all free. So nothing to lose if you join that. So that's all I have. I won't answer any questions since that's what our panelists are for. But definitely if you have anything, you guys can always contact me. The club has my email information.
Thank you, Allison. Hopefully that gave you guys some good insight into the CAS. And now we're going to go into our Q&A with our panelists. So we have 3 questions here. I'm ready for you guys that were submitted earlier. And then after that, if we have more time, we can go into questions from you guys. So our first question for the panelists is about your career. So how difficult or easy is it to change your career path if you take the CAS education path?
Awesome. So I'll jump in first. I will say that while my trajectory has been traditionally pricing, maybe to some that might seem like I haven't changed my career path a ton, but I do feel like I've gotten a lot of different exposure even within that within that scope. So I would say our skills are very transferable and very valued. I think anywhere you go, the actuarial skills that you build and the things that you learn are really will really help set you up for success. I have stayed in pricing for a long time, but I've seen a lot of people move from pricing to reserving roles to CAT modeling like Kathy has, to consulting even, or even risk and return management. Myself personally, I've moved around within pricing and gotten to see other focuses. So worked on different lines of business, which maybe is a smaller scale of being able to apply your skills and specialize a little bit more. But I would say I personally don't know that it's super difficult to change your career path if you're interested. And even at our company, we've seen a number of people move out of traditional actuarial roles into other departments just because our skill set is so valued, and really grow. As an example, one of our EVPs right now, she actually is from Purdue and was an actuary as well. So I think there are lots of opportunities just with the skill sets that you do earn as an actuary, and a lot of different paths that you can take. But I think some others who actually have made the switch and moved around a little bit probably have a little better insight than myself.
I can hop in a little bit. I actually was curious of what this question was intended to answer. I didn't know if it meant if you went down the CAS path and you wanted to go to the SOA path eventually, or if you're in the CAS path, just switching between being a pricing actuary versus reserving, or doing risk management or CAT modeling. I'll assume that it's the latter. And so to Sandy's point, I have found value in my career actually switching roles quite a bit. I've been in a role for a couple of years, and I felt like, I don't know if expert's the right word, but I felt pretty proficient at the job, but I wanted to get more experience. And so I either tried to rotate to something else, or I moved companies to get a different role to get myself more experience. So within a CAS, if that's what the question is about, I think it's actually a fairly easy process at times. Now, it depends on where you work and what type of business you work in, but it's something that's very possible. And if anything, it's probably encouraged for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I agree with everything Sandy and TJ said. And I'll say, kind of stepping back even further, and again, not knowing if this is specifically, it could even mean, changing career path completely. Something I'm a manager of people and have been for a while, both actuaries and non-actuaries, but for both, when I've had actuarial employees and non-actuarial employees, something I've always said to them is the key skills that we need to be successful in the jobs that we do, especially for actuaries, is we need strong analytical skills, we need strong technical skills, meaning being able to work with the data, code, that sort of thing. And we need to be able to communicate with our business partners and understand the business problem. That's truly what the actuary has, is blending all of those. In my experience, and again, my experience has been at Allstate and mostly in my pricing bubble, but I've, gone to lots of conferences and in CAP modeling in the past 7 years, I've gotten to kind of step outside of my bubble more. Those skills are necessary across all sorts of things, right? All sorts of industries. But in my experience, I think a lot of people who tend to be highly analytical and highly technical oftentimes struggle with the business problem side of it. And that truly is that's something that's stressed within the actuarial science track, is ultimately we're here to solve a business problem at the end of the day, with risk management, pricing for risk, reserving for risk, understanding risk in some way. And that's truly like a magical blend that is truly transferable to a lot of places. So depending on what sort of, changing of your path, it could be difficult, right? If you're going to switch into a completely different industry. But those skills of analytical skills, technical skills, and being business minded are very, very powerful. And if you can do that, you can be successful really in any industry.
So I will agree with my 3 panelists before me. Pretty much, I've had a career path that I've gone through lots of different roles. When I worked for a large insurance company, and not anywhere near as large as Allstate, there's a lot of so I'm sure, I don't know because I've never worked for Allstate, but there's a lot of chance within large companies to post for different positions within the company. So you can really learn a lot by going 2 to 3 years and try another area out within the company. If you work for a small insurance company, you're kind of forced to do all the things anyway. So you learn that way. And in consulting, you pretty much have to do what the client asks. And if you're just starting out as a student, you will get exposure to so many different areas. So as far as moving within the CAS, it's very easy. And to what Kathy said, it's very important. It's funny, we're all here because for the most part, we like math, or we're good at math, one of the two, or maybe both. But it's very important that you learn how to write well, how to speak well, how to talk with others, because so much what you're doing is selling your ideas to other parts of the company in a lot of ways. A salesperson's not going to be excited about a rate increase. And so you're going to have to learn how to describe why it's important and why you need to take this path. And so I think just the general skills you learn starting out as a casualty actuary, as a student, they transfer to all areas. Now, when I read this question, I read it as the SOA, transferring from the CAS to the SOA. And in all honesty, and this is kind of a depressing thing to say, but let's say you're 2 years in the casualty path and then you decide you want to move to the life path, that's 2 years of a 40-year career. It's probably pretty minor. So I wouldn't worry about, I mean, I think the general skills, regardless of where you move around, are going to follow you, and you'll be in good shape.
Perfect. Thank you so much for those wonderful answers. We'll move on to the next question. So this has to do with advice. What is the best advice you can offer for determining which career path is right for the said student that's here? So like consulting, P&C, health, life, retirement / pension.
This is an interesting question that I actually, I don't know that I have the best advice, but what I will say is when you're interviewing or talking to companies, I would definitely ask and see what they like about the work that they do. I think that is really what will pull you in and help you to be passionate and excited about the work, and really learn what the focus and goals of the company are. For myself, I obviously chose P&C. I thought, the slide that Allison had showed earlier that showed how dynamic the work is, I just thought that was really exciting to me, and it was really helpful to see how tangible P&C really is, because we all have homes and we know what cars are, and those concepts of how someone could be a riskier driver or not really resonated with me and made a lot of sense for me. So I think in that aspect, that kind of pulled me in, but learning about what things were coming with the industry were what really got me excited. Things like telematics and user-based insurance and things like that. I think, the work that I do today is going to be very different in 5, 10, 15 years. So even looking down the horizon and trying to see what companies are preparing for, because that will ultimately be the career that you're landing in, I think will be an interesting question and can kind of help you determine what is interesting and where you want to go in the long term.
I had an interesting occurrence in college that helped me with this. I actually was fortunate enough to get 2 different internships when I was in college. And the first one was at a life reinsurance company. And then my second one was at Allstate. And so I was fortunate enough to get both sides of the field. And my suggestion to folks would be, if you have the opportunity to do that, I would highly recommend it. Unless your first internship, you're so over the moon that you couldn't imagine doing anything else. If you have the opportunity to try both sides, I would recommend it. It gave me incredible perspective on the differences between each. When I did the life work, I thought it was interesting. The people I worked with were great. The company was fascinating. But the work was not as challenging, I'd say, as when I went to Allstate and I worked at that. And I saw all the different dynamic things that I could do on the P&C side, and I was sold immediately. So I would say that's my first suggestion. If you don't have that opportunity, I think Sandy's comment is a fantastic one. Use the resource that you have in terms of interviewing with people to try to pull as much information out as you can. Keep in mind, when you're interviewing with folks, they're interviewing with you too. And so put them on notice, ask them questions very directly. If you're truly interested in which side you want to go and you want to figure that out as best as possible, that's one of your best resources. On top of that, if you have any opportunity to try to job shadow someone or email people or try to find mentors that are former Purdue grads that work in one side or the other or both, I would highly recommend you do that. The last thing I'll say about it is, and I would try to reiterate this at times with the Actuarial Science Board, is that most students don't understand the incredible wealth of resources that you have at your disposal being at a university like Purdue. If you went to a non-actuarial school, it would be much more difficult, but being at an actuarial university and a pretty large one in terms of actuarial science, you have a tremendous amount of resources with the Actuarial Science Club and former alumni that I would highly, highly encourage you to use that to your ability as best you can.
Yep, I definitely agree again with everything that Sandy and TJ just said. So I think what I'll just add is, from my perspective, there's no bad choice. Like I recognize that you've got to make a choice, but getting some experience and passing and demonstrating the ability to pass exams goes a long way, regardless of what path you end up on. So if you try something out and you end up not liking it, and I recognize, right, this is a year or 2 or 3 years out for all of you, but like if you end up a couple years in and you don't like what you're doing, don't hesitate to go looking at another option. Again, the getting experience and demonstrating the ability to pass exams are important. But again, yeah, but definitely take advantage of all the opportunities that you have to ask questions. I will also say, I don't know, I'll be honest, I don't know. It's been a long time since I looked at the SOA site, so I don't know if they have all their stuff out there, but from the CAS, there are old exams out there from the CAS. That's not going to be true. It won't be added to going forward, but there is all the old stuff out there. And if you want to get an idea of like, what do we do? Like, obviously you can talk to us, but take a look at the exams. Like the exams really do, it is the stuff that we do. That's not to say everything that's covered is something that we're all doing every day, but a lot of the questions, the way they're asked, are connecting to here's what we're trying to do. Like in this state, we need to, figure out this rate or whatever, or reserving or whatever. So you can actually, I think, get a lot from just looking at some of those exams to get an idea of like, what do we spend our time doing? What problems are we trying to solve? Obviously, you won't see the actual what work are we doing, but if you read the question and you're like, that sounds really boring, then you probably aren't interested in that, in that pathway or whatever that is.
So I don't have a lot to add, but I can give you a different perspective because I did come from a non-actuarial university and it was very difficult to, I never had an internship. So I agree with everything, especially with what TJ said. You have to use all your resources because it's very valuable to ask questions, to get internships if possible. So how I decided on PNC was I only had one job offer. So that was kind of the easy way to make the decision. So if you have the opportunity to explore other avenues, I highly suggest it.
Great. Thank you guys for that advice. And then our third submitted question we had was, how much of your work encompasses the content that gets covered on the actuarial exams?
So I think Kathy kind of touched on this in her last answer, but I would say actually a lot. Going into the exam process and coming out of college, I remember thinking like, there's no way that the things that I'm taking and learning for these exams, I'm going to be doing every day. And I will be honest in saying that some of the prelim exams, those things maybe potentially aren't things that you're doing day to day, but they definitely are building blocks that help you with the upper level exams. And I would definitely emphasize that the things tested on the upper level exams are very relevant to our day-to-day work. As an example, exam 5, which actually is required to get your ACAS, is basic rate making and is pretty much the bread and butter of what I do every day. And, taking that exam is almost, a test on if I know how to do my job sometimes. But I would say that, that is really relevant by the nature of the topic, but even I can think of topics on exams 7, 8, 9 that also we touch often, if not daily. So I would say the work is really, I think Kathy said, like, we're not doing every single thing every day, but I would definitely say the things you're learning are relevant and are helpful.
I think I would add to that. I don't exactly remember how exactly Sandy said it, but I was going to say more than you think. And that answer can change over time quickly. To to what Sandy said, there were stuff I took in college, things I took in college, whether it be a class or an actuarial exam, and I thought, never going to use this. Why am I learning this? Okay, fine, I'll get through the class and I'm done with it. And then 5-6 years down the road in my career, it came up. I'm like, holy cow, how did that really? You would be surprised at the amount of stuff that comes back around. And if I can give you the best piece of advice I think I've ever given students is, don't take for granted that a job you have at any point in time doesn't use something you learned on an actuarial exam, because there's a very good possibility that it will come back around in a different job someday, whether that's with a new company or with a new role in your current company. When I started my career, I was at Allstate, I was entirely in pricing. That's all I did. And so that's what I focused on. But then when I came to the reserving side, all my pricing stuff was in the past, and now I had to rely on my reserving stuff. If I would have just assumed that I was going to stay in pricing my whole life and I don't need to worry about the reserving stuff, that would have came back to bite me in the end. But you never know, depending on if you work at a company that has rotations, or you decide you need to change, you want to go to a different company, depending on the size of the company, whether it's big or small, consulting, whatever, you could have a whole mixed bag of jobs. It may not be exactly what you're currently doing or what you're looking for. You might want a job that's in a certain area of the country or a certain type of work. Given the actuarial profession, there's a lot of actuaries, as Allison showed in her presentation. There's not that many. And while there may be quite a few, there's not that many open jobs at any point in time. So at times you might be able to do some of what you want to do, but it might come with other responsibilities, especially if you work at smaller companies. You might have to work on a whole slew of things. So I would say throughout your entire career, I would not take for granted anything that you learn. You may not be using it now, but it could very, very easily, and most likely will come around at some point in time. So I would always keep that in mind.
Yeah. So in my experience, when I was in a what we call at Allstate a traditional actuarial role, which is similar to like what Sandy and Allison are in currently at Allstate, for me, same as what just Sandy said. Absolutely, the basic rate making exam was what I was responsible for a lot of that. And then for part of my career, I was in our research type area. And so advanced rate making, getting into classification and rating plan development was doing that. So absolutely, the rate making material, if you are a pricing actuary, you are for sure doing. The other material, the reserving stuff, no, that we're not doing that. But to TJ's point, you never know what could come. I will also say, in the insurance world, all the different pieces are heavily connected. So while typically at Allstate, the pricing and reserving department are very separate purposefully. But there's a whole lot of interplay between pricing and reserving. And so it is valuable for us, even though we are not doing reserving, it's valuable for us to have awareness of reserving concepts and how things could be affecting what we're seeing in numbers. So there's a lot of value to that. And I very much appreciate having that picture, even though I personally have never worked in reserving. I very much appreciate having that knowledge that I gained from the exams. Now that I'm in a non-traditional role, my day-to-day, I'm not directly applying a lot of what's on the exams, but that's because I've purposely sought out a role where I am not just functioning as an actuary. So my scope, my responsibilities are bigger, and so I've got other things on my plate. But I think there is a whole lot of value in the role that I'm in, that I have all that knowledge from the exams, because the people that I am working with, who I am providing guidance and recommendations on how they should use CAP models and evaluating CAP models, are actuaries who are doing pricing, and actuaries and non-actuaries who are doing enterprise risk management and capital management. So that knowledge, while I'm not doing it directly, people who I am working with are, and having that understanding helps me, I think, tremendously with being able to collaborate well with those people and add a lot of value.
So just adding on, my first role, I think I said I was programming in Pascal, and essentially did the rate making syllabus for exam 5. That's what I used. And so and then when I moved to reserving later on essentially used exams 5 and 7. Now, back to TJ's point, you never know when you'll run into something that you took. Exam 6, I think in general with the CAS side, is known as probably the least fun exam. Definitely, it was the last exam I took back. It used to be exam 7, used to be an FCAS exam. But I actually ran into it later as a product manager and had to deal with the regulation and dealing with writing policy forms. And so, yeah, all of the knowledge on the exams are very important, and you can run into it at any time. So I think that in general, the CAS has done a good job of putting a mix of a lot of good education topics to prepare you in your career.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So that concludes our pre-submitted questions portion of this career panel. And now we're going to go into like a bit of a live Q&A. We have about 10 minutes. So we don't have too many people, so I don't think we really have to use the raise hand feature right now, but feel free to just unmute yourself. And then if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself, maybe just name and grade to the panelists, and then go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, I have a question. So my name is Rania and I'm a senior, and I was wondering if you guys can briefly describe like a favorite project that you worked on that validated your love or interest in the property and casualty field.
I think I'll go first. The one that came to mind, I had a few. I had a territorial project when I worked at Allstate that I found fascinating, where I had to do territorial rates within, I think it was the state of Oklahoma, and I got to do all these pretty color graphs, like all the territories. Early on in my career, I found that fascinating. That's one of them, but probably the more recent one is 4 years ago, I became the appointed actuary for my current company, which means I have to sign the statement of actuarial opinion every year. And it's one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult thing that I've ever had to do in my career, in that I do the internal reserving for my company and inform management of, my reserve analysis, but then I also have to sign the opinion on the company's reserves as well. And it ends up being, in the end, about a 1,500 to 1,600 page document that goes through an entire analysis of 80 or 90 different product codes, different lines of business in general. And so going through the exams, learning all the materials behind that, and actually putting one together and completing it was one of the scariest moments of my life, but also one of the most fulfilling, to be able to sign my name on that and be able to put together such a comprehensive report for everything that we do throughout the year. So that's my example.
I'll give, so I don't have a specific project, but the thing that came to mind was I had worked at Allstate. Most of what we're well known for in most of our business is in personal lines, right? Just people, car, your personal car and your house, your apartment, your condo. And that's what I grew up on, like I was trained on, that's where I learned. And then I was at a manager level. And I've been a manager with personal lines, but then I was rotated. I moved over to our commercial lines, and our commercial lines are small. They are very, very small. We don't write the big, large market, mid-market stuff. That is not Allstate. We write like our things like our agents. Like that's what we tell them. Step outside your office, look right, look left. That's what we want to write. The small things. But what I most enjoyed was when I moved to that team. I was nervous because I was moving from personal lines to commercial lines, and I'll be honest that there were some people that made me feel nervous. Like they were like, "Oh, it's not the same. It's not the same." A lot of people in that unit at that time, not the pricing team, but others. However, I was able to walk in and with the actuarial skills, with my experience, yes, it was a different product. Yes, I had to learn about the commercial customer is different than the personal lines customer. So there was a learning curve that I had to get up there. But I hit the ground running pretty quickly. And that's when I was most, I think I was most proud of myself, is that I achieved quickly, and I think faster than a lot of people thought, because I was able to take what I had learned, take my, again, those analytical, technical, business-minded skills and apply it to a whole different problem and do it well.
Yeah, I think that this isn't specific to property casualty, but I think in the actuarial field, it's nice to finally get to a point where people at the upper management level, even CEO, are looking for your opinion on something and being able to support the ideas coming from any reports that you do or indications or projects that you're working on. I think it's a good feeling to be needed in a company, and actuaries are definitely at the top of that chain.
My answer actually was similar to TJ's. I was going to say a territorial project that I had done was probably one of my favorites, in trying to understand what different characteristics could influence and justify different rates in different areas. We started looking into building models potentially, and I think that aspect of it is really cool and exciting.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rania, for that really nice question. Andrew George said that his microphone doesn't seem to be working. So we have about 5 minutes. We can probably go through his question. That can be the last one for today. But he said that he's a freshman here at Purdue, and his question is about catastrophe modeling rule. What does that encompass? Is that just simulating tons of disasters over and over again, or is it a bit more specific in scope?
Yeah, so a bit more than that, and to be clear, so my team does not build the models, so that is something that is quite different. Catastrophe modeling, I'll give you the quick, succinct thing. We use CAT models for the types of events where we can't use historical data, right? So for the vast majority of what we do as actuaries in any actuarial career, you're working with historical claims data. That doesn't work for things like hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes. They don't occur enough for us to be able to rely on history. You could try, you're going to end up with very bad answers. They're not reasonable to use. So instead, we got to do something different. So, but building a CAT model is quite complex because yes, so it does ultimately involve a lot of simulation of events, but in order to build the CAT model, you need expertise on the hazard, you need expertise on building engineering. It's very complicated and it's not cost efficient for every insurance company to do that. So instead, what's happened in the insurance industry is there are companies that have done that. AIR, RMS, CoreLogic are just a few. There's others popping up. A lot of startups are getting into it as well now. So the options are growing. But there are companies that do that, and then really all primary insurers are licensing those models, as are reinsurers. So we're not specifically building the models, but like what our role is at Allstate, and this type of role exists at pretty much every primary insurance company that I've ever talked to people with, either directly or they're leveraging a consulting firm for it, is since we're not building the models, we still need to understand them. Like we still need to use them appropriately. We need to have some idea of how they're being built and if they're reasonable and appropriate. And that's my team's role, is to be evaluating those models. So again, understanding the use cases for them and making sure that we're using the right ones. If there's any limitations, if we should be modifying anything, influencing the vendors who are building the models to take different approaches if we think something they're doing isn't appropriate.
Okay, I'm not sure if any other panelists want to add any input to that question, but
yeah, I think I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I will. I think that's the one area that I haven't worked in on the CAS side is the CAT modeling. But I just wanted to add in for all those that are interested, predictive modeling is growing, and almost every insurance company uses predictive modeling. So in general, when you're just thinking of modeling, lots of opportunity, lots of jobs within the CAS.
Perfect, thank you. So I think this is a good place to wrap up. Kaylin, is there anything else that we would like to add before we conclude this event?
I think we are all good.
Okay, perfect. Well, in that case, thank you to everyone for attending, especially to the panelists, and then also Allison for the short informational presentation on CAS. I did record this event, so I'll see if I can try to upload it somewhere. Obviously, I get permission from the panelists and Allison as well, but other than that, if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out to the club and we can get you in contact with the panelists. And once again, we're really appreciative of all of you attending. So yeah, thank you and have a nice night.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.